Hello there, my good students and viewers. Brian Doak here, coming at you from the campus of George Fox University, talking about Christianity and the problem of evil. And we have reached one of the final videos in this series. So those of you who have been tracking with this video series for a class or just for fun on YouTube or for some other purpose, this is one of our last ones. We're kind of coming down to it. Historically, we have finally reached the contemporary period. So we've started way back in this video series in our journey through the Theodicy, or problem of evil from a Christian perspective problem, with sources like Plato and the best of all possible worlds theory. We started in the Bible with the book of Genesis and the Torah, and we've moved our way through the Stoics, through the prophets, through the Old Testament, through the modern period of philosophy, into the New Testament, into some more contemporary 20th century kind of ideas about theodicy, and now we have finally reached today, Theodicy now, I guess I'm calling this one, prosperity problems and open theism. I'm just using those as kind of keywords for a lot of other things we'll throw in here. So this lecture is kind of a grab bag of topics that we can think about as we bring this plane in for a landing, as it were. Okay, so how does theodicy thinking work historically? Is it the case that in some past era there was an idea, and then another person came up with another idea, and then that supplanted the old idea and made it irrelevant, and then someone later came up with a new idea, and then those living in the Enlightenment came up with more ideas, Spinoza and Kant and Locke and all those guys, and then later in the 20th century some people did some things, and now today people have come up with an actual answer to the theodicy problem that rules the day? In short, no. This isn't one of those questions or problems, as you no doubt have guessed if you've been tracking with this, that works quite like that. The progress through a question like this through time is not linear, okay? So old ideas don't just go away. It's not like, the Stoics, they had that idea that we should just kind of grin and bear up under suffering, that it's actually good for us, and now nobody thinks that anymore because that was the Stoics then. No, these ideas persisted and get reconfigured and transmuted through time and are used in different ways. And really, we're living in the best of all possible theodicy thinking worlds so far, in that we now have the accumulated writings and wisdom and so on of quite a few centuries of thought and of work on this topic. Are we any closer to solving the theodicy problem? I would speculate not. I've got one or two more videos in this series, one in which I will say, I will come at you directly and say what I think is the best theodicy solution personally, or the best way of approaching this problem. But we have a lot of options on the table. Surely, if you've been following these videos, you have seen that. Okay, so let's get right to it. What are we considering today? Well, one more contemporary Christian theological movement I wanted to discuss is this idea of prosperity theology. Prosperity theology. What is prosperity theology? How does it work? Who advocates for this? And so on. Maybe I could, as a way of introducing you to prosperity theology, I could introduce you to a book. I don't have a copy of it here on hand. The book is called The Prayer of Jabez. The Prayer of Jabez. I believe it was written in the year 2000, if I'm not mistaken, by an author named Bruce Wilkinson. The Prayer of Jabez. This is a book that sold nearly 10 million copies, was on the New York Times bestseller list for weeks or months or something like that. I mean, just think of what it takes to have a book that sells nearly 10 million copies. That's a big deal for a book. So this is a very popular book. It was a book that I actually received. I think I was in Texas. I was traveling. I was in college. And I received this book as a gift from somebody at a church who had purchased, I think either their church purchased or this individual purchased multiple copies of this book, and were like giving it out almost like, like someone stands on a street corner and hands out leaflets or something. The person believed in the book that much. They gave me a free copy. And the book, I think, spread a lot in that kind of way. What is this Prayer of Jabez book about exactly? Well, it's based on a biblical passage. I've got my Bible right here. In the book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 4, kind of an obscure passage. We're in the midst of a genealogy in 1 Chronicles 4. The sons of Judah, here are the sons of this person, the sons of this person, the sons of that person. 1 Chronicles 4:9. Jabez was honored more than his brothers. And his mother named him Jabez, saying, because I bore him in pain. Jabez called on the God of Israel, saying, oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my border, and that your hand might be with me, and that you would keep me from hurt and harm. And God granted what he asked. Caleb, the brother of Shuha, became the father of Mehir, who was the father of Ashton. Ashton became and the genealogy just goes on. There's a little prayer sandwiched in there, prayed by this character, Jabez. Oh, enlarge my borders and bless me and give me money and things. And the text says that God granted him that prayer. And that prayer then, for this book, the Prayer of Jabez, which sold nearly 10 million copies, became the basis for this particular version of what we might call prosperity theology. And the Prayer of Jabez actually exemplifies this theology perfectly. What was the book asking you to do? What was the pitch or the thesis of the book? Basically, the pitch is, hey, this guy Jabez, he just prayed for blessings and God gave it to him. So you just have to ask. So the idea is that God wants you to have good things. God wants you to have blessing and be free from pain. Pain is of the devil, and poverty is demonic in this way of thinking. But wealth and material goods are God's blessing. It's what he wants to give his children in all of his goodness. And what do you have to do? You just have to ask. Or you have to do the right things in your life in some other way. I mean, maybe more strict versions of prosperity theology would say that, if we're suffering from poverty, from want, from depression, from anxiety, from all kinds of things, that there's a reason for this. It doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's because of things we have done or failed to do in our own lives. And so, because God wants us to have money, God wants us to be happy, God wants to bless his children. Why would God not want to bless his children? We need to maybe commit acts of faith, maybe by giving money to church or to a certain speaker on TV or in a certain faith setting. You give money or you do certain deeds, and then God will rain down blessing upon you. There are certain figures who are really big in this movement. Probably the most popular theology gospel Christian pastor today is a guy named Joel Osteen. Joel Osteen, if you don't know who Joel Osteen is, you can Google. He's got a huge empire. He's been on Oprah. He's sold millions of books. He has a huge mega church that he's a pastor of, I think in Texas or somewhere like that. So he's the biggest name right now. There's a guy named Kenneth Copeland, who's an older gentleman, him and his wife. I think her name is Gloria Copeland. Kenneth and Gloria Copeland are like the grandfather and the grandmother of the prosperity theology movement in some ways. There's a preacher named Creflo Dollar. Creflo Dollar is kind of a cool name. He is also a key prosperity theologian. There's a popular televangelist named Joyce Meyer. Joyce Myers or Meyer, I can't actually remember right now. Joyce Myers, I think, with an S. She's a popular prosperity theologian. And they basically all preach a message that is very much like this. God wants you to be happy and healthy and prosperous. And how do you get that way? You get that way by faith, by believing, by prayer, maybe by sowing seeds of financial gifts into certain ministries or doing certain things, and God then gives it back to you. Now, what does this have to do with theodicy? I mean, hopefully the problem of evil, suffering, theodicy angle here is super clear. The idea is that if you're suffering or something bad is happening, you may have done something bad to deserve it, or maybe conversely, if you're not getting the kind of prosperity and wealth that you desire, it's because you haven't taken the leaps of faith and the steps you need to take in order to get what God has in store for you. And you certainly see with the Prayer of Jabez, he just has to pray the prayer and say, God, bless me and enlarge my border and keep me from harm, and God grants the prayer. So it could be as simple as a prayer, or it could be more extravagant things. Now, pros and cons of the prosperity movement, of the so-called prosperity gospel. Well, let's start with the pros. From a biblical perspective, for those of you who have been tracking with these videos, you see this coming. The prosperity view is a deeply biblical idea. We see prosperity ideas all over the place in the Bible. They're ingrained in numerous biblical books and in biblical stories. The idea of a kind of, as we've termed it here, a kind of moral math or an act-consequence nexus. Or I've used a lot of different phrases and ways of talking about this way of thinking about the world. The idea that you get what you pay for morally in the world. You sow in the seeds of righteous behavior or bad behavior, as it were, and you get back goodness or harm based on your good or bad behavior. And there is definitely a connection between what you do and what you get. So prosperity theology. Now, the cons of this. The prosperity gospel has been critiqued sharply by many Christians. You can, if you Google prosperity gospel or prosperity theology, you can definitely find, the Wikipedia page or many things supporting it or talking about it, you can also find people talking about how it's demonic, how it's horrible, how it's manipulative, how it's used by certain Christian personalities on television to try to lure gullible viewers into sowing money, seeds of money into their own ministry while they get rich, fly around in private jets, and then people who, spend this money and prop these people up, are their lives actually getting any better? Maybe they're not. And if they're not, this whole thing is just a huge scam. And it's just another way to shame victims and to shame people who are in poverty, and to present a kind of false hope that God is a magic genie whom you can just conjure anytime you want with your magic prayers, and he has to give you money. Which, when put that way, seems like a pretty sick view of God from a traditional standard Christian perspective. And we know that there are other biblical perspectives too, not just the act-consequence nexus or the you give up a magic prayer and God gives you money kind of perspective, but also characters who go through great hardships, people like Job who struggle mightily. Although you could say Job is a great example for the prosperity gospel because he suffers and he does his thing, but then God rewards him double in the end. Okay. Nevertheless, people often look to Job as an example of a righteous sufferer, an indication on biblical terms that not everything that you do gets a payback in kind in the moment. We also have the book of Ecclesiastes. We also have Jesus, which suggests that sometimes people might suffer or even be born blind just so that the glory of God could be shown through some kind of miracle or perhaps in some other way. Who knows? We also have authors like the Apostle Paul in the book of Romans, as we've looked at, who maybe suggest that maybe some people were just created in order to be destroyed. And God throws them in the trash in order to show the glory of other people all the more. Or we have examples like the book of Revelation, which suggests people might suffer horribly in this life as martyrs, suffering for their faith, and you might not find your reward until the afterlife or some other time. So is the Bible a straightforward endorsement of prosperity theology? Definitely not. But if you're a prosperity theologian and if you buy into prosperity ideals, you can definitely find a lot of basic supporting material in the Bible, like from the book of Proverbs, from the Torah in many places, from what we call the Deuteronomistic history overall, which suggests the act-consequence connection in a very strong way. Okay, so that's the prosperity gospel. One person who has emerged as one of the biggest critics of the prosperity message, or one of the best American religious scholars who has analyzed the prosperity message, is a woman, a professor at Doak Divinity School named Kate Bowler. Got a little article from Kate Bowler here. There she is in one of her press photos. She is a professor of American religious history who in fact has studied prosperity groups as part of her scholarly work as a professor in a seminary, a divinity school. And she had a terrible thing happen several years ago. She was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, really bad, and possibly even given only months to live, and wrote a series of articles, one that appeared in the New York Times, which is particularly powerful, about her experience with prosperity groups, studying them, and then also having this disease which was not easily explained by like some horrible thing that she did in her life, at least according to her, okay, and people who agree with her. Maybe others would say, no, if you get cancer, you deserve it, and you need to pray in faith that God will remove it, and if you have enough faith, So this is the kind of battle that goes on with the prosperity idea. She also has a book called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved. So she thinks that phrase, everything happens for a reason, is bad. In fact, she concludes the book with a bunch of suggestions. And by the way, the book, Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lives I've Loved, is kind of like an expansion of her New York Times op-ed piece on her diagnosis and getting cancer and how she deals, with the prosperity idea. And so I totally recommend the book to you for a fuller statement on this. But she ends the book in a way, I thought this would be kind of an interesting practical thing for us to think about or discuss, with 8 things you should not say to someone who gets cancer and 6 things you should definitely say to someone in need. And this list maybe kind of takes us down to the heart of what Professor Bowler thinks are not good theodicy solutions, and maybe her list of things to say takes us into maybe some things she thinks are practically helpful to do in a real life situation. So how about the 8 things you should not say according to Kate Bowler? This is not my list, by the way. I'm not going to agree or disagree with any of this. I'm just presenting it to you as something to think about. 8 things you should not say according to Kate Bowler to someone with cancer. Number 1, Well, at least, and then fill in the blank. She says, whoa, hold up there. Were you about to make a comparison? At least it's not, what, stage 5 cancer? Don't minimize. Number 2, in my long life, I've learned that, ... She says, geez, do you want a medal? I get it, you lived forever. Well, some people are worried that they won't, or that things are so hard that they won't want to. So ease up on the life lessons. Life is a privilege, not a reward. 3, it's going to get better, I promise. She says, don't say that. She says, well, fairy godmother, that's going to be a tough row to hoe when things go badly. So if you say to somebody, it's going to get better, I promise, and then they don't, nice advice, right? Number 4, God needed an angel. So that's why this person had to die. She says, this one takes the cake because A, it makes God look sadistic and needy, and B, angels are, according to Christian tradition, created from scratch, not dead people looking for a cameo in Ghost. You see how confusing it is when we just pretend that the deceased returned to help you find your car keys or make pottery. Okay, a reference to the movie Ghost there from the 1980s. Maybe before your time, I don't know. Number 5, everything happens for a reason. So she thinks that's bad. You do not say that. She says the only thing worse than saying this is pretending that you know the reason. I've had hundreds of people tell me the reason for my cancer, because of my sin, because of my unfaithfulness, because God is fair, because God is unfair, because of my aversion to Brussels sprouts. I mean, no one is short of reasons. So if people tell you this, make sure you are there when they go through the cruelest moment of their lives and start offering your own. When someone is drowning, the only thing worse than failing to throw them a life preserver is handing them a reason. Number 6, I've done some research and, I thought I should listen to my oncologist and my nutritionist and my team of specialists, but it turns out I should be listening to you. Yes, please tell me more about the medical secrets that only one flaxseed provider in Orlando knows. Wait, let me get a pen. She's being sarcastic. Okay. Number 7, when my aunt had cancer, ... My darling dear, I know you are trying to relate to me. Now you see me and you're reminded that terrible things have happened in the world. But guess what? That is where I live, in the valley of the shadow of death. But now I'm on vacation because I'm not in the hospital or dealing with my mess. Do I have to take my sunglasses off and join you in the saddest journey down memory lane, or do you mind if I finish my mojito? Okay. Finally, number 8. So how are the treatments going? How are you really? This is the toughest one of all, she says. I can hear you trying to understand my world and be on my side, but picture the worst thing that has ever happened to you. Got it? So she's saying, don't put it like that. So that's her list. 8 things never to say to somebody. Here are 6 things she says you should say to someone maybe who's suffering with cancer or who are going through an extreme tragedy, in her opinion. Again, these are not mine. These are Kate Bowler's ideas. Number 1, I'd love to bring you a meal this week. Can I email you about it? Okay. So be proactive. Don't say, can I bring you a meal? Say, I'm going to bring you a meal. I will contact you about when. Number 2, you are a beautiful person. Number 3, I'm so grateful to hear how you're doing. Just know that I'm on your team. She says, you mean I don't have to give you an update? You asked someone else for all the gory details? Great, now I get to feel like you are both informed and concerned. Number 4, can I give you a hug? She says, some of my best moments with people have come with a hug or a hand on the arm. People who are suffering often, not always, feel isolated and want to be touched. Number 5, oh my friend, that sounds so hard. Perhaps the weirdest thing she says about having something awful happen is the fact that no one wants to hear about it. People tend to want to hear the summary, but they usually don't want to hear it from you, and that it was awful. So simmer down and let your friend talk for a bit. Be willing to stare down the ugliness and sadness. Life is absurdly hard, and pretending it isn't is exhausting. And number 6, she says silence. Just not knowing what to say. It's awkward, it's tragic, but she says show up and shut up. Do you get some Theodicy hints out of that? Maybe not, maybe you do, I don't know. Maybe it's good just life practical advice for how to deal with situations of extreme pain that you encounter in your own life and for others. Let me take a radical turn to some other ways that people have dealt with Theodicy. One theological idea that's popular in some quarters, I can't really say how popular it is like on an overall basis, but it's definitely popular in some quarters, is this idea of open theism or openness theology, sometimes called openness theology or open theism or something like that. One of the key proponents of this is a popular Christian author and pastor in Minnesota named Greg Boyd. Greg Boyd didn't invent this view. He's just one of the popularizers of it. He has some books on it and some articles and things like that, some blogs, some sermons. Basically, in a nutshell, I mean, the openness view can get very philosophically technical and rigorous, and I don't know if I can represent it faithfully here in the next 1 or 2 minutes, except by saying this. Openness theology posits that God knows every possible future. God is all-powerful and so knows everything that could happen, but because the future actually technically doesn't exist yet, and God can't know or do things that are logically impossible, like God can't make 2 + 2 = 5, God can't make a rock bigger than God can lift. Those are just like nonsense propositions. God can't make us a square circle, because a circle isn't a square, and that doesn't make sense. So too, God can't know the future in advance because it hasn't happened yet. He can't know something that hasn't happened. And insert a bunch of technical language philosophically here about how time works and the future works and all this kind of stuff. And God is just limited, just like we are in this way. So God isn't omniscient in one classical sense of the word, namely that God just can't foreknow something else. He's watching the world undevelop, just like we are. He's all powerful, acting within it. You can't stop God's purposes still in this way of thinking. But it removes one objection that people have made to the Theodicy triangle, namely the idea of God, that it's that all-powerful part of the triangle. Remember, God is good at the top, and then God is all-powerful at the bottom, and then evil exists or suffering. The idea that God is all-powerful, though, gets a kind of tweak from the openness theology crew, because God doesn't make evil things happen. God allows free will, and God watches the world unfold and interacts within it like we do, but doesn't push your car into the ditch that killed you senselessly, or God didn't foreknow and decide, and therefore decide in that sense that you would have cancer, exactly you at this time in your life. It's something that happens because of the world that we live in, because of choices that people have made, and because of the brokenness and fallenness of our bodies and our material world. But God isn't moving those chess pieces around. So the idea is that openness theology, giving God a kind of limitation on foreknowledge, you could say, although you can read Gregory Boyd's writings and see how he exactly puts it, but limiting God's foreknowledge, his omniscience in this particular sense, means that you get God off the hook in a certain way from being particularly cruel, and that is setting the table for you to suffer in particular ways by foreknowing that it would happen. Okay. So open theism has an angle on theodicy that some people, for just philosophical purposes, maybe for apologetics purposes, for arguing about the goodness and the existence of God, will find useful. And there are theological precedents for this view. It's not just something that Gregory Boyd invented in the 20th or 21st century, but rather something that different Christian thinkers have toyed with and thought about in different periods. Others reacted very strongly against Greg Boyd and other open theology proponents and said, no, you're ruining the classic idea of God. What is God if not all powerful, if not omniscient? You can't limit God's omniscience in any way through this openness idea. So there's a backlash against it. What else can we do? We can also make jokes about theodicy. We can just laugh at kind of the absurdity. And I think there's something sort of so-called postmodern about laughing at the absurdity of the theodicy situation. I saw an article from the satirical online newspaper, The Onion. I don't know if you've ever read The Onion before, which had a theodicy twist to it. The headline was something like, God admits he way less strict with last few billion children, or in the last few 1,000 years, or something like that. And the joke of the article is wow, you read the Old Testament and you think about olden times and how God was always smiting entire communities with floods and famine and pestilence. But now God really doesn't do that. We believe in a much nicer God now who wouldn't really do that to people. And so the joke, as many jokes are, actually has a serious core to it. Is it that God has actually changed, or is it that our views of God have changed, and that people in an ancient context were more willing to see themselves totally out of control in a universe that was full of death and suffering and floods and earthquakes that God sent to punish people? But now we've just become more enlightened. We don't think of God in these barbaric ways. Or for Christians, it's God had a son, Jesus, and, like a lot of people when they have kids, they kind of have to settle down and mellow out a little bit. God had to kind of do this when he had a son, Jesus, and Jesus suffered horribly, and God was like, oh, wow, we can't be doing that anymore, Can we joke about theodicy? Can we joke about very dark topics? Sometimes when I teach this topic in a traditional setting in class, it's harder to do over a video like this, but I've queued up some stand-up comedy routine sets by different kinds of comedians who are joking about very dark topics like cancer, or some Jewish comedians who have even dared to joke about the Holocaust. And I mean, that's something where it's like, okay, if you're part of a community or a group like a Jew, part of a Jewish community, maybe you and you alone even dare to have the right or the kind of space or the power to joke about something like the Holocaust. Certainly not something like that I as a non-Jew could joke about. But it's kind of interesting just to listen to those jokes and to think, okay, is this a way of dealing with theodicy, of dealing with suffering? Yes, it's serious, and yes, we cry, but we can also laugh. Maybe we can't always laugh, and maybe it's not always the time to laugh, but maybe there is a time for laughter and for just laughing at ourselves and the absurdity of our attempts to make sense of the world. All right, that's it for now. See you later. Bye.